1,568%. That is not a typo. That is the staggering, inexplicable number that shatters one of history's most romantic legends. Deep in the remote valleys of Pakistan, the Kalash people carry an ancestral signal so ancient and so extreme that it rewrites everything we thought we knew about who they are and who we are. But before I reveal the shocking DNA secret that leaves Greek ancestry in ruins, you need to hear the story we were all told. You need to understand the lie that lasted 200 years. And then you'll see why what's actually hiding in their genomes is far stranger, far older, and far more disturbing than any lost army of Alexander the Great. 1,568%. That is not a typo. 1,568%. That is how much more of a specific, archaic, deeply ancient Eurasian ancestry is present in the DNA of the Kalash people of Pakistan, compared to the populations living around them. We are not talking about a trace. We are not talking about a faint echo from 20,000 years ago. We are talking about a massive, roaring signal from the deep past, sitting inside the genomes of roughly 4,000 people, tucked away in 3 remote valleys in the Hindu Kush mountains. And when geneticists first saw this number, when they ran the algorithms that break down modern human DNA into its ancestral components, they genuinely thought their equipment was malfunctioning. Because the story this number tells is not the story we have all been told. Since you were a child, you have probably heard the same legend. In the mountains of Pakistan, there lives a tribe of lost Greeks. They are the descendants of Alexander the Great's army. They perform ancient Dionysian rites. They drink wine. They carve oak leaves into their temples. They have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they are the last living remnant of the Macedonian conquest of Asia. And for 200 years, Western explorers, colonial officers, photographers, and documentary filmmakers have climbed those same mountain passes carrying one singular obsession: to prove that these people are European, that these people are us. Here is the problem. When geneticists finally got their hands on Kalash DNA, not just a few blood samples, but whole genomes, sequenced at high depth, analyzed by multiple independent teams, the results did not just complicate the Greek story, they eviscerated it. And what they found underneath that romantic lie is something far stranger, far older, and far more disturbing for our understanding of who we are. Because the Kalash are not a lost colony of Greeks. They are something much more valuable. They are a window into the ghost population that built the world. A population that no longer exists anywhere else on Earth. To understand what the Kalash actually are, we first have to understand the story we were told. The accepted story. The one that every travel magazine, every coffee table book, and every breathless documentary voiceover has repeated for over a century. It starts with Alexander the Great. In 327 BC, Alexander led his army across the Hindu Kush into what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was one of the most brutal campaigns of his conquest. His men had already marched from Greece through Persia, through Bactria, and now they were climbing through some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. The passes were covered in snow. The valleys were controlled by fierce mountain tribes who fought with a savagery the Greeks had never encountered. By the time Alexander descended into the Swat Valley and began his assault on the mountain fortresses of the region, his army was exhausted. Thousands had died from cold. Thousands more had died from arrows and stones hurled from cliffs. The story goes that in these valleys, specifically in the area around Chitral, where the Kalash live today, Alexander left behind garrisons. He stationed soldiers in strategic positions to hold the conquered territory, and when his army finally turned south, toward the Indus and the battle against King Porus, some of those soldiers simply stayed. They intermarried with the local women. They built villages. They raised children with Greek names who remembered the old gods, and over 23 centuries, isolated in those high valleys, their descendants preserved their Greek identity. The Kalash are the result. This story was repeated with such confidence for so long that it became a kind of truth. It was repeated by British colonial officers in the late 19th century. Men like Captain John Biddulph and Major General Sir George Scott Robertson, who visited the Kalash valleys and wrote extensively about what they saw. They saw a polytheistic people in a sea of Islam. They saw wooden idols. They saw women wearing black robes with colored embroidery. They saw wine-drinking festivals. They saw dancing. And because these officers were classically educated, because they had grown up reading Homer and Herodotus, their minds immediately jumped to Greece. The Kalash must be the lost Greeks. The evidence was, to them, undeniable. The wine, the pantheon of gods, the physical appearance. Some British ethnographers even claimed the Kalash worshipped a god named Dizao, which they interpreted as a corruption of Zeus. They claimed the Kalash language contained Greek loanwords. They photographed Kalash children with pale skin and light eyes, and presented them as living proof of Alexander's genetic legacy. By the 20th century, this story had hardened into accepted fact. It appeared in imperial gazetteers, it appeared in school textbooks. The Kalash were officially, culturally, and historically designated as the descendants of Alexander's army. The Greek government even funded scholarships for Kalash students to study in Greece. Cultural exchange programs were established. The Kalash themselves, pragmatic and adaptable, learned that the Greek story brought them attention, tourism, and a degree of protection from outsiders who wanted to convert or displace them. There were elements of the story they embraced, or at least tolerated, because it served their survival. But the story was never theirs. It was imposed on them from the outside, and it was built on a foundation of colonial fantasy, not fact. Here is the first problem with the Greek story, and it is a historical one, not a genetic one, but it matters. There is no historical source from Alexander's campaigns that records the settling of a Greek colony in the Kalash valleys. None. Alexander's campaign was meticulously documented by men who traveled with him, by Ptolemy, by Nearchus, by Aristobulus, by Callisthenes. The later historians who compiled these accounts, Arrian and Plutarch and Curtius Rufus and Diodorus, wrote detailed descriptions of what Alexander did and where he went. They described the crossing of the Hindu Kush. They described the massacre of the Asakanoi and the siege of the fortress of Aornos. They described the capture of Massaga and the negotiations with the local queens. They described the foundation of cities, Alexandria in the Caucasus, Alexandria on the Oxus, Nicaea. Not one of these sources describes the establishment of a permanent settlement in the Chitral valleys. Not one. The valleys were not even a major strategic priority for Alexander. His focus was the Swat and Gandhara regions to the south. The idea that he left garrisons in the Kalash valleys is pure speculation, invented by British officers who wanted to explain what they perceived as racial difference in a way that flattered their own sense of European superiority. The second problem is the evidence itself. The wine, the gods, the dancing, the appearance. None of it holds up under scrutiny, and genetic scrutiny is the most devastating of all. Let's talk about the DNA. Let's talk about the actual science. Multiple major studies have examined the Kalash genome, and they all tell the same story. The first major genetic work was done by Luis Quintana Murci and colleagues, published in the early 2000s, looking at mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, which is passed down exclusively from mother to daughter. Then came the big one, the 2015 study in the American Journal of Human Genetics, led by Qasim Ayub and the Chris Tyler Smith Group at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute. These were not small sample sizes. These were rigorous, well-funded, peer-reviewed studies that looked at both paternal and maternal lineages, and eventually at whole genomes. And across every single one of these studies, every single one, the same result appeared with overwhelming clarity. The Kalash Y chromosomes and the Kalash mitochondrial lineages cluster overwhelmingly within South Asian and Central Asian gene pools. Not Mediterranean, not Balkan, not Greek. What did they find specifically? On the paternal side, the Y chromosome, the dominant haplogroups among the Kalash are L-M20, especially the subclade L1A, along with R1A Z93 and G2A. Let me break that down, because those letters and numbers actually tell a very specific story. Haplogroup LM20 is common in the northwest of the Indian subcontinent. It is found at high frequencies in parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. It is simply not a Greek or Macedonian lineage. The Greek and Macedonian Y chromosome pools are dominated by groups like EV13 and J2M172. Those are the lineages that were exploding across the Balkan Peninsula during and after the Bronze Age. If the Kalash were descended from Alexander's Greek soldiers, even in part, we would expect to see a significant, detectable presence of EV13 or J2 in their paternal lineages. We see essentially none. The Kalash Y chromosomes are South Asian, Central Asian, and Iranian Plateau. They are the Y chromosomes of the Hindu Kush, not of the Aegean. On the maternal side, the picture is even more striking. Because maternal DNA is sometimes a better indicator of deep, long-term population continuity. Soldiers may intermarry with local women, but the mothers of those communities preserve their own ancestry in their mitochondrial lineages for tens of thousands of years. And what do the Kalash maternal lineages show? The dominant mtDNA haplogroups are U4, U2E, H2A, and J1b. These are lineages with deep roots in Central Asia, South Asia, and the Eurasian steppe. U4 and U2E are ancient Western and Central Eurasian lineages that go back to the Upper Paleolithic. They are found in high frequencies in some of the oldest human remains ever discovered in Siberia and the Pontic steppe. H2A and J1b have their own deep histories in the Near East and Central Asia. What they are not is uniquely Greek. A Greek colony would have brought Greek maternal lineages, haplogroups like H1, H3, T2, U5A, or K1A, and those would have persisted in the population for centuries. They do not appear. The absence is so total, so absolute, that the 2015 study had no trouble concluding what it concluded. There is no genetic evidence of Greek or Macedonian paternal or maternal introgression into the Kalash population. None. The Greek story is not weakened by this data. It is extinct. And here is where the story gets extraordinary. Because when the researchers looked deeper into the Kalash genome, not just at paternal and maternal lineages, but at the entire autosomal genome, the whole complex tapestry of inherited DNA, they found something that made the Greek question look almost trivial. They found an isolation signal so extreme, so ancient, and so unusual that the Kalash became one of the most important populations on Earth for understanding the deep history of humanity. In 2014, a landmark study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, led by Garrett Hellenthal and others, that used data from the National Geographic Genographic Project to look at the fine-scale structure of human populations. This study developed a sophisticated algorithm that could detect not just recent admixture events, but very ancient ones. It could look at the DNA of a modern human and identify the ghost populations that contributed to their ancestry thousands of years ago. And when this algorithm was applied to the Kalash, it produced a result that stunned the researchers. The Kalash showed one of the earliest and most pronounced signals of ancestral North Eurasian ancestry anywhere in South Asia. Let me say that again. Ancient North Eurasian. ANE. This is a genetic component that was first identified in the genome of a boy who lived near Lake Baikal in Siberia 24,000 years ago, a boy from a site called Malta. The Malta boy belonged to a population that no longer exists, a population that contributed substantial ancestry to modern Europeans, to Native Americans, and to Central Asians. And the Kalash carry more of that ghost lineage than almost anyone else in their region. But that was not all. The same studies found that the Kalash carry an elevated ancestral South Indian component, an ancestral signal that is maximized today in the indigenous populations of southern India, deep in the Dravidian-speaking South. So the Kalash genome is a mixture of these two deeply ancient streams, a northern hunter-gatherer stream from the Eurasian steppe and a southern hunter-gatherer stream from the Indian subcontinent. These two streams came together in the Kalash ancestors thousands of years ago, and then, and this is the crucial part, they stopped mixing with anyone else. They froze. They became a genetic time capsule. The FST analyses, the statistical measures of genetic differentiation, show that the Kalash are extreme outliers even within Pakistan. Pakistan itself is already a region of remarkable genetic diversity, a crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Iranian plateau. But within that diversity, the Kalash stand apart. They are more genetically distinct from their immediate neighbors than almost any other population in the entire country. And the numbers that explain that distinctiveness tell a story of profound isolation. Estimates based on patterns of linkage disequilibrium, the way stretches of DNA recombine over generations, suggest that the Kalash have been isolated, endogamous, marrying only within their small community, for a period that various studies have estimated at between 6,500 and 11,000 years. Let that sink in. 6,500 to 11,000 years. That is not the scale of a Greek colony left behind by Alexander 2,300 years ago. That is the scale of the Neolithic. That is the scale of the first farmers. That is the scale of the end of the last ice age. The Kalash separation from neighboring populations is so ancient that it precedes the rise of the Indus Valley civilization. It precedes the arrival of the Indo-Aryan languages in South Asia. It precedes the domestication of the horse. It precedes the invention of writing. The Kalash are not descendants of a historical army. They are survivors of a prehistoric world. And this isolation has left its mark in the most visible way possible. The signature trait that has fueled the Greek myth for 2 centuries, the light eyes, the light hair, the pale skin that Victorian explorers found so remarkable, that trait is not evidence of Greek ancestry. It is evidence of something much more biologically fascinating: genetic drift. In a small, isolated population, certain genetic variants can become more common over time, not because they are advantageous, not because they are selected for, but simply because they happen to be present. Through random chance, like flipping a coin and getting heads 10 times in a row, a neutral variant can rise to high frequency in a small gene pool. That is what happened with the Kalash and their pigmentation genes. The variants near genes like SLC24A5, TYR, and HERC2, genes involved in skin, hair, and eye color, are present in the Kalash at unusual frequencies, not because a Greek army introduced them, but because inbreeding and isolation amplified them. This population, which numbers only a few thousand, went through a bottleneck. A small founder population carried certain pigmentation variants. Over thousands of years, through drift, those variants spread through the entire community. The Kalash look the way they look, not because they are European, but because they are a tiny, isolated gene pool that has been turning inward on itself since before the pyramids were built. Let me be precise about what the science shows, because the nuances matter. The Kalash are best understood as an ancient, deeply drifted South Asian population. They share ancestry with other populations of the Hindu Kush and the Northwest subcontinent, with groups like the Nuristanis and the Barusho, who also carry unusual genetic signatures. But the Kalash are the most extreme case. They have elevated ancient North Eurasian ancestry, meaning they descend in part from a population that lived on the Eurasian steppe before the last ice age reached its maximum. They also carry ancestral South Indian ancestry, meaning they descend in part from the deep, indigenous populations of the subcontinent, populations that may be related to the people who built the earliest civilizations in the Indus Valley. And they carry this ancestry in a combination that is unique to them, shaped by thousands of years of endogamy and isolation in 3 narrow valleys surrounded by 10,000-foot peaks. The 3 valleys are called Bumbaret, Rumbur, and Birir. 3 green valleys, watered by snowmelt, walled off from the rest of the world by mountains. And within those valleys, the Kalash have preserved not just an ancient genetic signature, but a way of life that may also be a survival from deep antiquity. Because there is something else that complicates the Greek story. The Kalash religion, the polytheism, the wine, the dancing, the carved effigies. These are not Greek imports. They are local continuities. The Kalash are the last surviving practitioners of an ancient Indo-Iranian religious tradition, a polytheistic system that predates the Zoroastrian reform and shares deep roots with the Vedic religion of ancient India. The Kalash call themselves the people of the creator god Dezau, and they worship a pantheon of deities and nature spirits that include the god Mahandeo, the goddess Jushtak, the warrior god Sajigor, and the trickster Balumane. Their religious specialists are called Dehars. Their festivals mark the agricultural cycle: the spring festival of Joshi, the harvest festival of Uchao, the winter solstice festival of Chamos. They make offerings of wine and juniper. They sing epic songs that describe the creation of the world and the origins of their people. None of this is Greek. None of it owes anything to the Olympian pantheon. It is a branch of the same ancient Indo-Iranian religious tree that produced Zoroastrianism in Iran and Hinduism in India. It is not the religion of Alexander's soldiers. It is the religion of the pre-Islamic Hindu Kush. And it survived, against all odds, through centuries of Islamic conquest, Mongol invasions, British colonization, and modern tourism. It survived because the Kalash valleys were simply too remote, too inaccessible, too difficult to conquer completely. The mountains protected them, the same mountains that no Greek army ever colonized. And that is the core tragedy of the Greek myth. It is not just wrong, it is a theft. It steals from the Kalash their genuine, astonishing heritage. Because the true story of the Kalash is not the story of a few thousand lost Europeans clinging to a fading memory. The true story is the story of a people who are the last living embodiment of a deep ancestral stream that once spread across the entire Eurasian continent. The ancient North Eurasian ancestry they carry in such abundance is the same ancestry that runs through the veins of every Native American, from the Inuit of the Arctic to the Mapuche of Patagonia. It is the same ancestry that contributed to the first Americans, who crossed the Bering Land Bridge more than 15,000 years ago. The boy from Malta, whose genome was sequenced in 2013, is an ancestor not just of the Kalash, but of the people who built the first cities in the Americas. And the Kalash carry that ancestry at levels that are virtually unheard of anywhere south of Siberia. The ancestral South Indian ancestry they carry connects them to the deepest roots of the Indian subcontinent, to the people who were there before the Indo-Europeans, before the Dravidians, before any of the populations that dominate the region today. The Kalash are a living fossil, a snapshot, a time machine, and we spent 200 years trying to turn them into Greeks. Let me make this personal for a moment. If you have ever taken a commercial DNA test, a test from one of the major ancestry companies, you may have received results that include a small percentage of something unexpected, a few percent of Central Asian, a trace of South Asian, maybe even a whisper of Native American. And you may have wondered where that came from. What ancient migration, what forgotten ancestor, what hidden story lies behind that fraction of a percent? The Kalash are what happens when one of those fractions becomes the entire genome. They are not a mixture of recent populations. They are a pristine remnant of ancient populations. And that means they carry genetic variants that have been lost everywhere else on Earth. Variants that may hold clues to human adaptation, to disease resistance, to the deep history of our species. The Kalash are a living laboratory of human evolution, and we are only beginning to understand what they can teach us. But here is the part of the story that science cannot answer. And it is the part that should keep you up at night. The deep ancestry of the Kalash raises a question that no geneticist has been able to resolve. The ancient North Eurasian ancestry is there. The ancestral South Indian ancestry is there. The two streams are mixed together in the Kalash genome in a combination that is unique. But how did they get there? What was the process? What was the event? What was the population movement that brought a Siberian ghost lineage together with a South Indian ghost lineage in the mountains of Pakistan? The models suggest an admixture event that took place many thousands of years ago, perhaps during the Upper Paleolithic, perhaps during the Mesolithic, perhaps at the dawn of the Neolithic when the first farmers were spreading across the Iranian plateau. But no one knows exactly when, no one knows exactly where, no one knows exactly who. The Kalash genome is a letter written in a language we are only beginning to read, and it speaks of a population that existed before any of the populations we know today. A population that has no name, a population that left no monuments, no written records, no archaeological signature that we can unambiguously identify. A ghost population, and its blood still flows in the valleys of the Hindu Kush. One of the most peculiar findings in the genetic studies is the level of allele sharing between the Kalash and a very unexpected population, the Han Chinese, and to a lesser extent, some Native American groups. This is not evidence of recent admixture. It is evidence of shared deep ancestry, an ancient connection that goes back to a time before the ancestors of Europeans, East Asians, and South Asians had fully separated. The Kalash preserve alleles that are shared with East Asians at a level that is greater than most other South Asian populations. This is not because any Chinese army ever climbed into the Hindu Kush. It is because the ancient population that contributed to the Kalash was part of a genetic continuum that once stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific, and from Siberia to the Indian Ocean. The Kalash are one of the last remaining points on that continuum. And then there is the question of their numbers. The Kalash population today is estimated at around 4,000 to 5,000 people. 4,000 to 5,000. That is smaller than a single town. That is smaller than the student body of a modest university. And yet they have survived, with their language and their religion and their genetic uniqueness intact, through millennia of conquest and conversion. The Kalash language is an Indo-Aryan language, but it is a Dardic language, a branch of Indo-Aryan that preserves archaisms lost in the lowland languages. It is spoken only in the Kalash valleys. When a Kalash person dies, the community carves a wooden effigy, an ancestor figure, and erects it in memory. When a Kalash woman gives birth, she is considered ritually impure and moves to a separate house until the childbirth period ends. These customs, some of which have drawn criticism from outside observers, are not Greek. They are not even particularly unusual in the context of ancient Indo-Iranian traditions. They are the practices of a people who have been separate for so long that their ways have become strange even to their closest neighbors. And that separation is now under threat. The Kalash are under pressure from multiple directions. Conversion to Islam has reduced their numbers over the centuries and continues at a slow but steady pace. Tourism, ironically fueled by the Greek myth, has brought both economic benefits and cultural disruption. Climate change is affecting the glaciers that water their valleys. The modern world is encroaching, and the unique genetic heritage that the Kalash carry, this assembly of ancient variants, this combination of ghost ancestries, this record of 10,000 years of isolation, could be diluted or lost within a few generations. The Kalash are a finite resource, a genetic archive, and we are only now beginning to read its contents. There is one more irony in all of this. The Greek myth, for all its falsehood, may have inadvertently helped to preserve the Kalash, because it gave them a certain celebrity. It made them interesting to outsiders. It brought them a degree of protection and resources that they might not otherwise have received. In the late 19th century, British colonial officers recorded detailed accounts of Kalash life that are now invaluable sources for understanding their culture. In the 20th century, anthropologists from around the world came to study them, drawn by the romance of the Greek story. And in the 21st century, geneticists came to test the story itself. The myth was a doorway, but once we stepped through the doorway, we found a reality far more extraordinary. The myth was wrong, but the myth led us here. It led us to a discovery that is not about Greece, not about Alexander, not about any of the colonial fantasies that gave birth to it. It is a discovery about the deep structure of human history, about who we are and where we came from. And the answer is not simple. It is not a story of one people. It is a story of many peoples, mixing and separating and drifting apart over tens of thousands of years, across continents that were once connected by climate and migration and survival. So the next time you see a photograph of a Kalash person with their distinctive black robes and their carved jewelry and their bright, unusual eyes, do not see a Greek. See a survivor. See someone whose ancestors were already old when Alexander was born. See someone whose genetic code contains the memory of a world before writing. See someone whose existence challenges the whole idea of purity, of fixed categories, of the stories we tell to make ourselves feel superior. The Kalash are not descended from Alexander's army. They are descended from something far stranger. They are descended from ghosts. They are descended from the people who once lived in the spaces between the great civilizations, in the mountains and the steppes, in the forests and the river valleys. They are the memory of a world that is gone, preserved in 4,000 human beings, in 3 valleys on the roof of the world. And they are still there, still dancing, still singing, still worshiping their ancient gods, still passing on their ancient genes. And if we are wise, we will listen to what they have to tell us, because what they have to tell us is not about Alexander. It is about us, all of us, every human on this planet. The ancestors we share, the journeys we have made, the ghosts that walk with us, whether we know their names or not. One last thought. There is a reason this myth persists. There is a reason the Greek story has survived despite all the evidence against it. It is comforting. It tells us that the world is orderly, that people can be classified, that if a group looks different, behaves differently, worships differently, there is a simple explanation. There was a war once. An army passed through. They left something behind. And everything since then is just the unfolding of that single, comprehensible event. But the truth is messier. The truth is not the story of a single army. The truth is the story of 100,000 years of human wanderings, of glacial cycles, of populations blooming and fading, of language and religion and genes, all on different timelines. The Kalash embody that messiness. They always have. They were never Greeks. And now we know that. And now we know what they are instead. They are the thread that ties us all to the deep past. And that thread is still unspooling. If you want to uncover more hidden truths that rewrite history, subscribe now and hit the bell. You won't believe what we're exposing next. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.